this is the most outlandish thing I've ever seen anybody do, and I just love it. It's like, okay, here we go. To me, that's kind of what it's like. It's so well. In the first place, at that time, at that time in our history, the fact that they were gay and they started acting like they were gay, even the fact that they did that and lived that out was big enough. But then when you add all the stuff that Nick was doing, just because he wanted to, that's what he wanted to do. And there's just not very many people who do that. You got that?
Yeah.
There really aren't very many people who do that. To me, that's what makes it such an enchanting story.
It's a very well timed for this moment in our history as a country. It's a very gimlet-eyed view of what America really is, and the idealized post-war world that we were all raised to believe was the best world in the world, the best place in the world. When in fact, if you were not part of the mainstream, if you were a poor white boy from Georgia, or if you were a rich man's son from California, from San Francisco, none of that mattered because you were an alien. And the whole thing that they use their money, which is their superpower, and their intelligence, because Carter becomes extraordinarily more and more intelligent as you understand him, as he matures, as he grows up and older. But they use their power to fight what was the best of all possible worlds. The world that was presented to me as a child was, this is the greatest world. The world my parents said, look around you, this is the greatest world. It wasn't.
Justine, I'm a lawyer and a book recommender on a podcast, and I live in sunny California.
Hi, my name is Kit Carter. I'm the bar manager at the Great American Music Hall, and I live in San Francisco, California.
My name is Ulysses Dietz. I'm a retired decorative arts curator, spent my career working in a museum, and I live in suburban New Jersey outside of Newark and 20 miles west of New York City.
My name is Simon Donoghue. I am a college professor, director of theater, and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay, well, my name is John Johnson. Oh, I didn't give you pre-roll time. I'm sorry, I'm terrible already. My name is John Johnson, and I am actually a high school and college English teacher, and I am in Fishkill, New York.
Sean McNamara. My occupation is a COO of a nonprofit organization in Arlington, Virginia.
I am Meg Perry. I am a librarian at a state college here in Florida, and I live in Daytona Beach, just like you do.
Brian Rollins, voice actor, audiobook narrator in Littleton, Colorado.
My name is David, and I live in New York City. I came here to be a classical singer. I still do that. I also work in an office as an underwriter.
JB Sanders, upstate New York, USA. I do tech support by day, and I've written the Glenn and Tyler series of books. We're up to number 5 right now.
My name is Eugene Stewart. I'm a retired attorney, retired for the last year, and I live in Vallejo, California.
Carol Haggard. I live in Austin, Texas. I'm retired, so I don't do very much.
And I'm also your mother.
Oh, that's right. And the reason why I talk to you on the phone, talk to Frank on the phone a lot. Are you the third person? The reason why I talk to you on the phone a lot is because I'm your mother.
So how old were you in May of 1953?
Oh, goodness. I would have been 11. I would have been 11.
So what did you think when you read The Unexpected Heiress, the first Nick and Carter book?
Well, actually, I thought it was great. I had a little trouble identifying with not identifying, that's not the right word, seeing it as clearly as I could have had I lived in the city in 1953, but I didn't. I lived in Little Town in West Texas. So the city thing was what I had to identify with as far as it being that year, 53. Does that make any sense?
No.
Anyway, that's what I thought.
The premise in the description sounded interesting because it was historical. And so I read a lot of historical mysteries. And I clicked on the first one. It might not have been the first one that you wrote. It might not have been the first in the series. I don't remember now. But I went back, if it wasn't, and plowed through everything that was out. And that couldn't have been more than one or two books, because after that I was hooked. And that's how I stayed with it.
You asked me to narrate the books. I think was the first time I heard about them. Of course, we had that lovely mix-up. I think you sent me a Facebook message months before I had reached out to you, and I had either missed it or had like I'll deal with it later and completely forgot about it. And then when I was looking, it was like I'd finished. I think it was book 4 of Glenn and Tyler, and I was looking around and I'm like, oh, this is the other author, and he likes John Sanders. I'll reach out. When I reached out, that's when I saw your old message from me. So that's kind of how I first kind of got into hooking up with you and narrating the audiobooks.
It was during a conversation about some books that you wrote earlier that this came up. I collect books. I specifically collect mysteries. The Communion of Light books came up in a conversation, and the person I was discussing them with said, he's starting to write a new series, and you might be interested in reading them. And I picked up, which was the one I first picked up? The Unexpected Heiress was the first one I picked up. And they just took off from there.
I think it was Amazon Kindle that recommended the book. And then, of course, I read the synopsis and thought, oh, that sounds good. I'll pick it up. I immediately fell in love.
Amazon is actually where I heard about your series. I read a lot of gay books and detective books, and your first couple of books kept coming up in the suggestions of something I might like. And I kept saying, yeah, I'll have to check that out, because there were so many books appearing so quickly at the start of this series. I was like, this might be a big undertaking. And then I got to summer vacation that year, and I don't know, I think I read like the first 9 books in about 2 weeks.
I believe that it was that first day that you and I met at Starbucks, because I knew that because you had told me online that you wrote gay mystery, but I didn't know what you wrote. And so after that long conversation that first day, I started reading the books. So I'm pretty sure it was there.
Well, I've been pondering, I'm trying to remember how I first learned about it. I know I bought the first book, The Unexpected Heiress, very fast after it was released. And I reviewed it pretty quickly right after that. So I was and still am a voracious and rapid reader. And I don't really know how I learned about it. My comment in the review about, another author to keep tabs on, suggests that I learned about you from other authors, that somebody mentioned the book in one of the feeds I get every day saying, here are new books to read. So there are various possibilities, but I'm not really sure.
I'm not sure how I first heard about the books. I assume I get all my book recommendations and suggestions from Facebook and Amazon, but I think this was a Facebook thing. What I had read the beginning of a series with another Nick in it and did not care for it. So when I saw that it was, middle of the pack 15, 16, I said, huh, that's the other series. I don't really like that. I read book 1. And then somewhere along the line in the Facebook discussion, certainly I realized there were different books. I finally picked one up and I read the first one because I'm a completist, and I read all of them straight through without any other books in between until I caught up.
I first heard about Nick and Predator, I believe, when you messaged me through Facebook after, I think, friending me, and we talked a little bit about Liv and Tyler, and you mentioned that you were doing books with a certain similar theme, but they're not. The differences are stark.
Kindle Unlimited. I bought something from Amazon, and they gave me a year of Kindle Unlimited back in 2016, and I came across Some Enchanted Evening, which I read in less than a day. And then I quick picked up the first book in the series and just started reading all of them on Kindle Unlimited, and then went back and bought them all. So I have them for good.
I probably was reading Amazon and looking at books, and the description of the book came up, and I thought it was interesting. So definitely Nick, but it's because he's exactly the guy I would have wanted to meet in a gay bar if I was buying someone a drink. He's the guy.
So you know who my favorite is, Gustavo. I love Gustavo because no matter what is going on, and no matter how worried he is, or no matter how angry and upset his partner is, he retains a level of optimism that is unmatched by any of the characters in the novels, and most people in real life.
This was difficult, but what I keep coming back to is Gustav, and I can't exactly tell you why. I think because he puts up with Ferdinand, and because he's such a good employee and such a good friend, and I just think he's adorable. I love him.
For some reason, Gustav keeps popping up, but also Uncle William. William, right? What's his name? Nick's uncle. He's just so uninhibited, so much fun, and so sassy. Snarky might be a better term, but yeah, he amuses me a lot.
Great Uncle Paul. I would say he's my favorite. He's such a dandy. And I love the fact that he had that competition to see who could screw the most a fireman in San Francisco, which is hilarious. And I love how he just comes up in Nick's dreams. And he's just a great character. He's someone I'd love to tromp around San Francisco and in Paris with.
So my favorite character, I had to sit there and go back and forth. I mean, I enjoy Nick. Nick is fun. But Carter really he's just kind of been an interesting kind of character. It's just as he's grown and changed, coming from his old Southern roots, and kind of, he has a sort of fish out of water, especially in Nick's world, not just being in Northern California, but also rolling in Nick's world. So he's just kind of been, a fun character. But in terms of when I get to narrate, I can't think of her name. I'm drawing her book. Marnie's mom. Mrs. Not Wilson. I'm drawing a blank. But Marnie's mom is a hoot to narrate because she's just this sassy old lady. She has and for whatever reason I love narrating sassy old ladies.
It's really hard to pick. Probably Marnie's mother, Nick's stepmother. I just enjoyed the character. But I've enjoyed, there hasn't been a character that I haven't thought fit in. There hasn't been a character that didn't advance what was going on. I couldn't pick out one, but if I did, probably Nick's stepmother.
There are so many characters that I love in your books. I love, of course, Letty and Marnie. Can't leave out the ladies. Robert and Bob and Mario, Uncle Paul, and of course Nick and Carter. But I guess favorite, I have to admit I have a little bit of a crush on Ronnie Grisham.
Well, this was tricky because I love a lot of the characters in the world. Some of the historical ones, but my knee jerk would say, oh, I really love Marnie because I love her evolving relationship with Nick and Carter. But really, Nick and Carter are the center of it to me. And in thinking of, I know that sounds very expected, but in thinking of how my relationship to these books has evolved over the years, is that they started out as contemporaries, even though I was a lot older than them when I started. But then eventually they turned into my parents. And so my whole relationship with them becomes very much, I identify with them as me, and then I identify with them as my parents' generation and people who could have been friends of my parents. It is an odd thing to think about but I think they define, I know it's idiotic, but they define the series and their characters. Neither one of them is more important than the other, which is something you do so well. But their characters really define the shape of everybody else. But I got to say, Nick's relationship with Marnie is a particularly favorite of mine.
Well, my favorite may not be a surprise to you, actually. My favorite character is Marnie. I just love her and adore her. I picture her being Eve Arden crossed with 99 from Get Smart, where she's the brains, but the guys don't really realize it. And I just think that she's so charming and so fun in the books. And I was always looking for more of her as the series progressed, which paid off in some books. But other than that, I'd have to say Carter is definitely a catch. Nick certainly lucked out.
That is so hard, After 32 books, I've got so many favorites, but I think that basically and this may surprise you, but basically I like the supporting staff in your books. I love Nick and Carter; they're always my favorites and stuff. But I love Marnie. I love Mike Robertson. I loved Lord Gerald. It's the way in which you take a character and build them and give them all sorts of ways to move around in the story and such that it just fascinates me.
I'd want to talk to them more about, well, two things, because I think I would want to talk to them about politics, because I think one of the things that you really dug up so beautifully, and how do I confess this? Because from my generation, I think of the younger generations of gay kids, lesbian and gay kids, as not really understanding what happened earlier. And I grew up in the generation that was taught about what happened pre-Stonewall. So I love the way you delve into the politics that surrounds everything else, the way political figures keep getting brought, and not just American ones. I mean, I think that becomes ultimately really fascinating. but also the kind of social life, because I grew up in the immediate post-Stonewall years, or I came out in the immediate post-Stonewall years, and the idea that San Francisco was this, happy place. The Castro was where everybody went, and it wasn't. That San Francisco was, like every place in California, really unpleasant. Well, like every place in the country, really, really unpleasant. And the same thing was true of the other place I know really well from that era, which is Greenwich Village, which was a place I hung out in college with my boyfriend. And so the whole idea that these were shelters and that it wasn't happy, it was hiding. It was a place where you felt safe, rarely safe. So I'd love to talk to them more about that, because that's what makes them so exceptional, is that, and I brought this up early in the reviews, is that they're sort of like superheroes. They're kind of Batman and Robin, although I used that metaphor once, or simile once, and I don't know if that quite works because their dynamic's not that. But that they have superpowers because of Nick's money, and so they can deal with that world in a different way. So it's both the politics and the social side of things that I really want to talk to them about.
I'd probably want to know stories from early in their relationship. The ones that we didn't hear about, because the series spans so many decades. I really liked the start of their relationship. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the entire series, but I loved when they were still sort of courting and falling in love, and early on in their couplehood, where they were still finding their way and sometimes getting on each other's nerves. And I would love to hear more of that era, I think.
That's very difficult because the setting of your books is sort of a setting where I've lived and done things right up to their first house on Hartford Street. And so, I'd like to talk to them about their life in San Francisco, about their being gay, about their taking on all the powers that be, which they do so often. I mean, they seem like such nice guys after 10 minutes. I'd flirt a little, of course, but you just want to chat with them. Probably I'd ask them if I had all the universal knowledge I have from reading the stories. Probably I'd ask them, how do you deal with having all this money? Isn't it a pain in the ass?
What the transition was like to having money, from coming from being regular guys with regular jobs to all of a sudden having money. I mean, I kind of know how that was for them, because you talk about it in the books, but that interests me. Lottery winners and sudden inheritance that people weren't expecting. So I think I'd ask them about that.
Carter, I'd like to find out, I'd talk to him more about before he came to San Francisco and the trip to San Francisco. Nick, there's the one lover of his, the one that died in Korea. I can't remember his name. I love that character. I would love to hear Nick talk more about him. I would ask him every question about him as possible and his time in the Navy with him.
If I met them in the 60s, I would have been a young man, and I'd want to know what keeps them going, what keeps them moving after meeting all the kind of people, both negative and positive, what keeps them moving forward. If I met them in the 70s, I would want to know what they're living through, because they're both now getting to the point where they're looking outside of the relationship, and they're looking at how each other affects other people outside the relationship, how the business is being built, and how each one of them is affecting the business, like their own special interests are now playing into the business. And so each decade that you're writing forward brings them into a political view, a socio-economic view, a sexual view. And it's fascinating to watch them grow within the books.
I think I would just like to sit and talk about current events and get their take on it. Something like, could you really have imagined this sort of future when you were going through all those trials and tribulations, when the government was after you,
I guess just to be real basic, I'd probably want to ask about the top of the mark incident with the Hearsts, I guess. Yeah.
I would want to just hang out and talk about not anything in particular for a few hours over food or something like that. I can't think of anything I'd want to know. It seems like I know everything from the books. But yeah, they seem like they would be a fun couple of guys to hang out with.
What it was like to live the life they lived in the 1950s and the 1960s. I am born the same year that the books begin. And, you know, as a straight white male, I have not really experienced anything like the kind of pressure and prejudice that they did. Now, it helps to have more money than anyone else in the world, probably, to endure it. But what I really have enjoyed throughout the series of the Nick and Carter books, and also the Daytona Beach books, is the idea of what it takes to survive and how wherever they go, they're running into people who are surviving but living with a fair amount of oppression. And I appreciate the fact that they do what they can to alleviate it.
Well, first I'd have to ask Nick to take me to lunch because I'd love to be able to go to Top of the Mark. But honestly, I mean, it's not so much one question I'd want to ask. I'd love to just sit and have a conversation with both Nick and Carter, just about what it's like. And you picture one thing. You picture the 50s and the 60s as one thing. But my recollection of that is just what I learned from movies. And obviously what these guys are going through it's a different culture than what, what we see in the movies. We don't see the culture and the lifestyle that these guys live. So it would almost just be a conversation about what it's like to be them and what it's like to live. It's just a constant, the constant hiding of who they are and what they want. And I mean, obviously not those two, they're out there and they're a little more, we don't care. We've got money. It's like, lock us up. We don't care. We can post bail.
Yes. Doll. Calling it all the women doll. I know he's a product of his time, and that's what was done then. But every time I read that, I'm like, yeah, stop it.
Nick's smoking. I know it's a product of the time period, but every time he whips out a cigarette, it's like, damn it, boy, don't do that. His smoking is just, it drives me crazy, but that's just like my own personal hang up. And the other thing that kind of annoys me is Carter's eating habits. The generic, it's like, garlic's too spicy, it's like, I'm a white boy that grew up in Central California, but even I'm like, you gotta have some variety.
Nick annoys me on a regular basis, and I'm not quite sure I can put the finger on it, but it's he seems to get irritated at all the wrong spots. I mean, he goes through and the McCarthy commission is after them, and he goes through it just fine. Somebody says something at Top of the Mark, and I'm not talking about the George Hearst incident. That was certainly no good, and he just gets irritated and wants to leave. To me, it's an unpredictable trait that I don't find attractive.
Nick that he smokes, but he does kind of quit. No, mostly I think Nick annoys me the most. What he does is that he internalizes a lot, and sometimes he doesn't say what he feels, and then you end up with him punching you in the kidneys.
Nick can be a bit of an asshole sometimes. It's just part of his character, I think. So it would be difficult to say that really annoys me, but you know, he just sometimes maybe he's not patient with people. Where Carter is always patient with everyone. Nick sometimes, and of course Carter's a big guy, therefore very rarely threatened by anyone because he's a big guy, and so therefore it's easy for him to be comfortable with people because he's always in a controlling situation. Whereas Nick is like this skinny guy, you know, he's got a good right hook that he can pull out when he needs it, but he's more likely to be on the defensive. And certainly being a skinny gay guy, he's probably found himself on the defensive more often than not. And so one way you'll deal with being on the defensive is, you know, you set the rules first, and that makes you be a bit of an asshole sometimes, even when it's not necessary.
Form of passive aggressiveness that all couples get after a while, that each one drives the other one crazy, but the other one stands it because they know that person so well. So in the beginning books, Carter kind of let Nick blow off steam and fly around like a top and, you know, just be the cock of the walk and type of stuff, and he was the supportive person. As the book started going through, Carter started becoming a little more self-described and self-interesting, and his family kind of started making him a more rounded person, and Nick was a supporting person. So as they're growing, each one supports the other one's growth in this sort of passive aggressiveness because they're both alphas, even if they don't want to say they're both alphas. They're both alphas, and they're both fascinating, and they're both really interested in what the other one's doing.
I've got to say, one of the things that dawned on me last night as I was thinking about this is that when Nick was born on Nob Hill, my mother, as a little girl, was living a few blocks away with her parents on Pacific Avenue. And I'd forgotten that she lived in San Francisco. But, and this will make sense in a second, I think, Nick's sort of rejection of his own class, you know, he puts on his hi-hat voice, which ticks off Carter. But that, and part of that is Nick's appeal because he becomes sort of a streetwise everyman, but Uncle Paul is the reminder of where Nick comes from. Uncle Paul is the Gilded Age, because remembering the Gilded Age was my specialty as a curator, so that whole era is really interesting to me. But Uncle Paul is a reminder of who Nick really comes from. Uncle Paul is Nick's ancestor, not his father or grandfather, really. And so the fact that Nick kind of shuns that, and I know that may come from you as an author, but for me as someone who is very tied up in my Gilded Age background, I'm sorry Nick didn't make more of that. But of course, then he had to accommodate to his husband, who was a cracker from Georgia. So I have very conflicted feelings about that, but that's pretty much the only thing about Nick that bothers me. I mean, you know, even your best friends annoy you at times. And there are times when I want to shake the two of them and say, look, don't do that to each other. So I suppose there are plenty of things, but even the people we love most annoy us.
Not really. I would say, like, if we could open it up to any character, then I would say probably Henry and his little moods that he gets into. And I love it and I hate it. And I love it because I know people like that, you know, and I hate it because I hate those people. but I love it that it's such a real thing. There are people like that do those things.
Nick can be frustrating in some of the books because he doesn't listen to the people around him. He always feels he knows what he's doing and he sort of dives headlong in. And while, you know, that also makes him a very human character, you know, there are times where if he had just stopped and listened to anybody else, they wouldn't have ended up in the mess they were in. So sometimes that could be irritating.
Who am I most like? It's a hard question because I'm not sure. I mean, I suppose if I'm more like anybody, I'm more like Nick, in that, for all the fact that he kind of pretends not to acknowledge it, Nick understands the workings of power instinctively from his arrogant father. And of course, one of the things I love about the series is the reconciliation between Nick and Dr. Williams. But so I guess I'd be I'm a little bit more like him. I'm also his height, as far as I can tell, although I'm shrinking. And I guess that's it, because I think about their circle of friends, and I'm not. I like all of their friends, and I realized that early on in this series of books, those people, all those characters, all resonated with me as as echoing the circle of gay friends I made after I came out in 1975. Is that I suddenly had this circle of people who really weren't exactly like me, but all fit with me, and I fit with them really well. So that's the sort of way I feel about that, even though they were all very different from me.
I would say probably more Nick than Carter, but if I had to transpose onto one of the characters, I'm not sure who I would choose. None of them really spring out at me. Maybe one of the computer geeks.
I'm probably more like Carter. Why? Well, because I'm not like gigantic like Carter, but I'm 6 foot. I weigh 293 pounds now, but during my formative years, the 20 or the 40 years, I was usually like 230, 240. And so I have to deal with the world the way he does, sort of, where you don't want to be a bully, you don't want to frighten people. You want to be a nice guy, and I was sort of brought up by my mom to be a nice guy, so.
I guess a little bit of both. I'm good with languages like Carter, but then I'm horrible with names like Nick. I remember little details about friends and acquaintances, like birthdays and likes and dislikes and things like that, like Carter. And I guess like Nick, I have a weakness for big, tall, hairy guys.
I'm more like Mike Robertson. I'm kind of the mover. I'm the administrator. I'm the person who keeps people on track. I can tell you where you're going. I can tell you what your story is. I can be supportive of that. But, I'm more of the second ring of hell for you.
Oh, I'm certainly not like Nick or Carter, although World Raconteur and Billionaire would not be a bad thing. Now, honestly, the character that I always kind of connected with, he was a really minor character, but I always thought that's who I would be, is Robert. He's the one who was always juggling all of these things behind the scenes and keeping everything going smoothly. And he'd pop up with a quip or something and then disappear. And that's pretty much who I am. So that's kind of, I liked Robert a lot. I feel like he had an interesting story off stage. And someday when somebody writes the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead version of your series, we'll find out what he was doing.
This is, again, I think his name's Robert, the one who takes care of all his properties in the plains. I think I'm more like him because I'm kind of OCD. Also like Maria, because I'm trans. And Yeah, those two I think the most.
Nick, I am just that big of a smartass. It's not a huge departure to drop into his head. I hope I'm not as emotionally damaged as Nick is, but it definitely, I definitely am, kind of that snarky smartass that he is. I just don't have the money to back up my mouth, so I have to keep it in check. But even my wife Jen, she'll like, oh yeah, you're Nick, you're totally Nick. And so it totally, there's other characters, I'd like to be, like Carter, kind of that squishy, warm teddy bear kind of guy, and very, emotional and stuff. But ultimately, I'm a big mouth like Nick.
I tell you who I'd like to be like is Marnie's mom. Her name escapes me at the moment, but everything she's able to accomplish and the way she manages things and people and events, I'd like to think would be able to do that too.
I'm really like Carter. I just kind of try to float through life, do my job when I'm needed to do my job, and not worry about it the rest of the time, and then take care of the person who's most important to me.
Yeah, Raymond Burr was gay. I did not know that. That completely blew my mind. Also, I think all the little things about San Francisco that I didn't know. I never knew that Selma was south of the slot, which I'm trying to bring back. I refer to it as south of the slot all the time now. I live 4 blocks away from where they lived up on Sacramento Street. So I keep looking through everything, finding all this history of San Francisco I didn't know. I didn't know there was a Compton's cafeteria at Market and Van Ness. When I first started reading your books, I'd have my iPad right next to me, Googling every single thing in the books to see where they were, look at pictures, see how things were back then. But I think the Raymond Burr was the biggest.
Tons of things. Every book I was flipping over to Wikipedia or the internet in general and looking up like locations or facts, or occasionally I even went to Google Earth Maps, the Google Earth Pro, the one that you actually have to use as a separate program, not the actual in the web maps, just to get a look at the environment. Like I did that for where their house is located in San Francisco, where various locations in San Francisco were. So I looked up some of the locations in Africa occasionally. I didn't Google Earth Paris. I probably should have done that anyway. But I could picture the house and the Turkish bath in the basement. That just went right into my head. Didn't really need a lot of extra inducement for
that. It's really the little details. I mean, I have sort of a broad understanding of gay history, but it's really the little details about life, what it was like for a gay man living in the 1950s, even in a big city like San Francisco or New York. It's the little details.
This is a compliment to your research skills versus what I've read from other authors in the past. The way that you structure each story, you bring the reader into a avenue for them to either read the story in one way, which is a straight through, it could be a mystery, it could be an adventure, straight through, or you allow them to open doors along the way and catch glimpses of the emotional things that are going on, the life that's going on around them, what's happening in the world at the time. what is causing somebody to make a decision that you yourself would not have seen coming. Like when Nick had to fight his admirer, and how he had to get through life knowing that this guy really, really cared about him in a very sick way, and allow that to color him in some senses, because it still colored him no matter what. All the stories color them, but this colored him in a way in which he then had to be a lot more careful as he was moving forward to not make those mistakes or not make those observations before. And you set that in such a way that you allowed him to be tired, and you allowed him to feel left out of the emotional process, in that he realizes what he causes, he realizes what he brings upon himself, but then he also realizes all the people around him who are supporting him to get through some of these things and to grow from some of these things. So that would be my answer, is that each book brings me to a different place. When you went to Africa, I was so pleased, because no one's ever really written about Africa about that time. You know, when you talked about France, I was so very happy, because there are places I've been, there are people I may have met, there are things that I could almost touch, but were fun to read about.
You know, a lot of the history that you used was really interesting, because it was obvious reading along that there had been a lot of research into different things going on in each of the years. Some of the references to, I knew about the Lavender Scare, and I knew different things that were going on at different points in some of gay history, but it's such a element that's not taught and not really passed down. And because there's a shrinking population of our elders in this community, a lot of that doesn't get passed along. And I liked the fact that even though this was a fictional series, there was a lot of real life world events going on around them that would get a casual mention, or would be a headline in a newspaper, or would affect whether they could travel or whether they could be in certain states and things like that. So I thought that was a fascinating aspect of the series, and something that I didn't know enough about.
From the sweets that came from Australia, to the fact that Robert Kennedy worked for McCarthy. But what I really found interesting was their time in Zimbabwe, and when it was Rhodesia and before it came Zimbabwe. I thought that was and all their time in Africa, I thought was very interesting. It's not a part of the world I read a lot about or think a lot about. And they gave me a lot of details that I found good.
How interesting. Well, there are lots of little things, like Carter's knowledge about fires and stuff, when he'll discuss some scientific aspect of investigating a fire. And I'm interested. I have a scientific frame of mind, if you will, had chemistry sets when I was a kid and that type of thing. Most of the detective business stuff, since I've been reading mysteries since the Hardy Boys when I was a kid, I kind of know about that. But there are certain things, certainly things that Carter knows about how fires work and what they do, and you're following. We want to see where the ignition point is and where the fire started and all that, which I knew nothing about really, and found very, intriguing and interesting.
Oh my gosh. Well, I didn't know anything much about the history of San Francisco in the days when you started, and the raids and all that. I've learned a lot of history from the earlier books, and I didn't know any of that. And then the travels to places I haven't been, those are cool, because I get an idea of what all of that is like. 2 years ago when I was in Italy, we had the chance to take a side trip one day to the Isle of Capri. And I didn't want to go for a couple of reasons, but another reason that I didn't want to go was because I had a picture of it in my head from when Nick and Carter were there, and I didn't want to mess that up because I'm sure it's not like that anymore. So I wanted to keep that kind of cool, pristine picture of Capri in my head.
Oh, I think you're plucking bits of history and mixing them into the stories was fascinating. I mean, each episode I would be waiting to see who is he going to pull out. Of course, then I get very caught. Then I got very caught up in it. I mean, the whole Rosalind Russell arc fascinated me because you really stuck with them all the way through. And she was somebody I knew. I didn't know her personally, but she was a character I knew growing up. So I knew all of those references to her career, although I didn't know anything about her husband and their marriage, and her charitable works and all of that. That was all fascinating to me. But I don't think I knew in specifics the kind of consistent and relentless persecution of gay people. I knew it from J. Edgar Hoover's point of view, but I didn't know it from the broader perspective. And I know a lot of this is fictional because you've made up the stories. But that idea that, again, it was dispelling this myth of the good old days, which I refer to in a lot of my reviews. The idea that you were really under a cloud, and that really right to the end, the right wing in politics in California seems to be bent on getting Nick and Carter, and even after they're dead, getting the people who take over from them. I mean, I've read all the books that follow too, for which I'm very grateful, by the way. And the whole idea that the right wing considers them a persistent thorn in the side was something I hadn't ever really thought about. And I also, and this is again sparking my own fascination with my own words. It was fascinating to me the way you made it very clear that just because you're very rich doesn't really protect you. You have to still be brave. That Nick and Carter are brave, and and I'm sure this is true, that there were a lot of rich gay men in the 1950s and 60s who basically hid, who used their money to hide. And I could actually name a few literary figures. I mean, Noel Coward, Somerset Maugham, people like that, who really hid behind their fame and their power rather than do anything to help their community. And that's not so much, that's something that didn't exist really. So that I think is the thing that I had no sense about, is that of Nick and Carter, in spite of their money being persecuted or being targets, because I guess they are persecuted, but they're always they have their superpowers.
Like, because of my work, what I was very interested in, from just the point of view of this is a lot of fun, is the interactions with that they occasionally have with people like Raymond Burr, Rosalind Russell, Rosalind Russell took a swipe at Gail Storm in one of the books. I had to put the book down. I was laughing so hard because My Little Margie and Oh Susanna were a huge part of my childhood, and I never liked her because she had too much teeth.